Well, good evening or good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. So this talk is about Peergos and custom apps specifically. So building end-to-end encrypted peer-to-peer apps without trying. I guess be warned, there will be code snippets. But before that, I'll introduce the vision. So our vision at Peergos is to build a private web where end users are in control of their data. So Peergos offers the peer-to-peer connectivity, the end-to-end encryption, fine-grained access control, strong metadata protection, and it's all open source and self-hostable. Now, this is all built on a global file system where people have total control over all their own data. That is necessary, but not sufficient. The ability for people to extend the platform to add custom functionality is where we think innovation is. So with custom apps, we realize the private web. Okay, so who am I? I'm Kevin O'Dwyer. I'm a co-founder and R&D engineer. I'm the only, we're a team of 4 co-founders. I'm the only one who doesn't have an advanced degree in physics or maths.
Kevin, do you have a Twitter handle? Because I'm going to live tweet some stuff I could at you.
No, I'm afraid I don't. Just use the Peergos one.
Right. I'll use the pointer. If I'm live tweeting, how do I point to Peergos? Wait, it's an interoperability problem.
Yeah. Okay, so I've been a software engineer for 20 years. It feels like a lot longer. I grew up in a generation of 8-bit computers. So in my case, it was Commodore 64, and taught myself to program as a graphics programmer in the demo scene. So way back when. Now we'll introduce some of my previous work because it actually dovetails nicely into this project. So if I get to the next slide, I wrote JS PC emulator over a decade ago. So this was the world's first full x86 emulator. It was a port of JPC, which was written by none other than Ian Preston, who is the driving force behind Peergos. As in the screenshots, you will see a graphical Linux, in this case, basic Linux running Joe Window Manager, and also Secret of Monkey Island running in DOS. So that was a big thing way back then. It actually predated JS Linux, as I said. Okay, then I worked on JS DOSBox. So this was the first emulator where you could run Doom in the browser, and also Future Crew's Second Reality and Alex Evans' 64K paper demo, amongst a lot of other things. More recently, I've worked on Boxed Wine, which is an emulator capable of running 32-bit Windows binaries, again, in the browser. So you see Age of Empires, desktop applications, including Abbey Word for a full word processor experience. Now, I guess the common theme in here is running arbitrary user-controlled code in the browser, and that is exactly what a custom app is. So Peergos does actually have a lot of apps already, and we use dog fooding to validate our approach and our API, and that's what I'll go on to explain today. So I'll just go through some of these existing apps that we have that prove the work that we've done so far. So I've got a calendar. We have this social feed to display a timeline of content that has been shared with you. We have to-do, task list, Kanban board, and we've got editors for Markdown, viewing PDF files, and for doing for media viewing. So in this case, streaming videos. And that's actually an interesting case because a lot of the technology we developed to stream and seek videos in the browser is very core to how we do sandboxing and custom apps in Peergos. So that in mind, I'll move on to Peergos custom apps. And what we're doing is essentially serving up arbitrary HTML. Well, sorry, I've got 2 more. So I've got chat and email. So now we get to custom apps. So again, we have Doom. So you can serve up arbitrary HTML, CSS, JavaScript within Peergos, and got Doom, a SkyMap application I originally wrote for mobile way back when, ported that to JavaScript. Now, some more, I guess, apps which you would have seen before. So to do MVC, this is often used to validate web frameworks. So about a dozen lines of changes. I managed to get that to run in Peergos, and I will actually walk you through those changes in a couple of slides. Have an image editor.
Can I ask one question, Kevin?
Yes.
So serving arbitrary JavaScript and HTML is sort of like just the ability to serve a file to the browser, right?
It's a little bit more.
Yeah. What does it make? What is a Peergos app beyond that?
Okay, that's coming up very quickly, but essentially all the resources are in Peergos itself. So we're serving it from within Peergos, and which means that all the work is done on the client, all the decryption, all the permissions checking, and so forth. So I'll go into a bit more detail on a couple of slides, but yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and yes, thank you for that. Okay, so image editor, word processor, and Winamp, which is a JavaScript implementation of Winamp 2. So I guess, yeah, in history, nothing is new. So many years ago, both Dropbox and Google Drive allowed and supported hosting static websites. And everyone on this call has probably used various JavaScript playgrounds linked to Stack Overflow answers. And you may even use some of those online IDEs as part of your daily work. So this is a little bit different. I guess what the thing that makes it a big deal is that there is no backend. Everything that is consequential happens in the client. So that's your encryption, your decryption, permissions checking, everything like that. So, and why are apps important? Well, it just makes everything so much more useful. So when PCs got software, it resulted in a lot more PCs around. When capable phones arrived, emergence of apps drove further adoption. We're hoping the same thing will happen with Peergos. Okay, so this is where I get into some of the technicals. So the requirements is, it's important to remember that in an end-to-end and peer-to-peer network like Peergos, the server is not trusted. So the stakes are high. If you lose your private keys, then it's game over. So each app must live in its own separate OS process. You must stop any external requests which could be used to exfiltrate data, and you need to enforce a permission system to guard app behavior. So, okay, now we get to the implementation.
If you're in the browser, do you actually have control over whether you're in the same OS process?
Yes, so that's the second bit in this slide here. So the window cross origin isolated, you can check that to see if you are actually a separate OS process. I think Ian might be able to say a bit more to actually confirm that, but that's my understanding. All right. Okay, so we use a standard iframe inside of an iframe. That seems to be what a lot of these code plugins use, and it works perfectly fine. I guess we have a unique app domain, so that's that SHA-256 of the app path, the first part of after HTTPS. Which also means you don't share cookies, local storage databases, so forth. And then an important part of it is the content security policy. Now that's a big chunk in itself. There's lots and lots of different policies. I guess the three that are mentioned there are pretty new, and they're very important to actually lock down a sandbox. Okay, I should point out that there are actually limits with what's possible with current browsers. So for example, DNS prefetch and web RTC CSP directives aren't actually implemented in all the browsers yet, which is a bit annoying. And the last one there is service worker and writable stream. So that's what we used to take control of the request response flow. We intercept requests, do some validation, permissions checking, and so forth. So what do we get? We get the private web. So with the above in place, you can serve up your own personal website. You simply take a static website, upload it to Peergos, and Bob's your uncle. But what makes the web hyperlinks? So if you start an absolute URL with /Peergos, that allows you to navigate to any other person's website within Peergos itself. And you have the usual access control system in Peergos, which is totally respected. but websites are not apps. Resource retrieved or only GET requests. So this is where I start talking about the API. So this is /Peergos-API and the version of the API, the actual API, and the resource.
Oh, one more clarification, Kevin. So when you said you start the URI with Peergos, that means Peergos in place of HTTP is that it's a protocol essentially?
No, so in a HTML file, if you want to, I guess, link to another someone else's website within Peergos, you just start the URL with /Peergos.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. All right, so I've got an example there of a API call to data, which means retrieve app data. We'll get to what that means, but essentially you identify the API and then the path to the resource. We support get, post, put, delete, and patch. Only append for patch at the moment. We then have permissions. So at the moment we've got about 4. I've listed 2 there, but we also have permissions for reading contents of a folder, modifying a file chosen by a user. And the last one is the app manifest. So that's like a mobile phone manifest. It describes the app, describes the associations. So for example, should the app launch for image files? Should it for document files? Is it a folder, action? And as well as that, you also need to specify the app permissions, and which have to be agreed upon before you can install the app. Okay, so now we get to the app anatomy. So all files for the app exist underneath assets, and the other file in the left-hand screenshot is Peergos.json. So that's the manifest file, and down the bottom you can see an example of what that looks like. It's just a JSON file that indicates, I guess, some metadata, but crucially, the file mapping. So in this case, file extensions. So this is for viewing HTML files, and it has permission of edit chosen file. So you can actually edit the file as well. And the way you install it is once it's uploaded into Peergos, you just go to the context menu for Peergos/app.json and go install app. You can actually call run app as well. So that allows you to just have a fast cycle of run, edit, debug, whatever, just a nice tight loop. Okay, now we'll get to actually some apps and code. So sorry, this is a little bit busy, but this is a very simple app that demonstrates a thumbnail gallery. So this is an app that's a folder action, and it has a file association of images. So in the index HTML, you just search the URLs. Sorry, you go to the retrieve the URL search parameters for path, and that gives you the folder path that you clicked on. You call fetch, and assuming you get 200 status code back, you decode the response, and you'll get this JSON format of files and subfolders. And from that, you can call get again with the folder path and the file name, and question mark preview equals true. And what that will do is return the thumbnail for that image, and then you can just set the image source to that text, and it'll appear on the screen. Okay, so that's a very simple app. Next one is a Markdown editor. So this is for an app with a file mapping for Markdown files. In the top right-hand corner, again, we get the path. You can also get the theme as well. So if Peergos is running in dark mode, you can actually figure that out and apply that to your app. And then I've got a get request in order to get the contents of the file, and a put request to save the contents of the file. If it auto saves, or if you have to press the save button in the toolbar. Okay, moving along to to-do MVC. So originally, this was an example I found on the internet. They used local storage for storing their to-do items, and it was really 10 lines of code, and I changed it to use Peergos to store the to-do items. So as you can see here, I'm calling the API with Peergos-API v0 data, and the local storage key, which is just a random key, calling get, and I just code whatever the response is, and in the other direction, I call put in order to save the to-do items to Peergos. Okay, now next one's a little bit more involved. So what we're talking about here is a sample that demonstrates exercising the chat API. So this is the same chat API that's used by the Peergos chat application. This could be used for developing a multiplayer game. Essentially, you save the state of the game in the chat messages. So you have two players, Alice creates the game and Bob joins the game. So when the call is made, the form data is created, you set the title, you set the number of people you want to invite, and you call the post method on Peergos API v0 chat. And as part of that, Peergos will launch a add friends to app modal, and you can invite whoever you want to the application. Now, crucial thing here is that's privileged code. So the app itself doesn't know your social graph. It only, but once the chat channel is created, what gets returned is the chat ID. Now, Bob can go to his social feed and he will see an invitation to join the app. So that's what's in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, so chat number 2. So there's essentially 2 actions you want to do. One is to retrieve messages in the chat channel. So that's the top code. You just pass in some paging parameters and the chat API endpoint, and you'll get back all the messages. And the bottom one is to add a chat message. So that should be all pretty straightforward. And as I said, in this case, it's for a chess game. So the messages are move a queen to e5, move a rook to f3, move a pawn to d5, and so forth. So it's a nice way to write multiplayer games using existing functionality. Okay, so talk a
Is
bit
that
about
chat channel scoped to a application, to a user, to users that user knows who use the same application?
Okay, it's bound to the application, and it's bound. The only people who you can invite are your friends.
Okay, so it is the people who have the same application who are also connected to you.
Yes, they don't have to have it at the time you invite them, but yes, they obviously have to have it installed in order to use it.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, just a little bit about compatibility. So Chrome, yeah, it all runs fine. I develop in Chrome. I find it very easy to debug. In Firefox, you can, but you have to. Well, sorry, I should say that in the the development version of Firefox, it's all fine. If you use just the standard Firefox, you have to enable writable streams. There's been a bug open for 4 years. I don't know why they haven't enabled it by default, but yeah, it's annoying. Safari, there's actually 2 blocking bugs. There's not much we can do about it at the moment. So one of those is around, I guess, if you want to run Peergos over localhost, it just doesn't like it. And also with their writable streams, well, service worker and writable streams together, there's a few issues. Yeah, so hopefully there's movement on that. Like at the start of this year, they did actually fix a few bugs, so we could actually do streaming in Safari. But yes, for sandboxing, it's not quite there. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say as part of my introduction. So I've got a link to the tech book. I've got a link to the GitHub repo with some example apps. I encourage you, if you think this is interesting, to sign up for an account. And also we accept donations as well. Okay, questions?